Hi, I'm Julia Pike and I'm the Financing Director for Sizewell C. That's a new nuclear project on the east coast of England in Suffolk. And I'm here to talk to you today about how we hope to do the power of good for Britain, how we hope to provide net zero electricity and hydrogen, and how we're exploring direct air capture, and how we're making some innovations in the way that we're building Hinkley Point C, which we want to bring forward into the Sizewell project. So where are we with Sizewell C? So Sizewell C, as with any big infrastructure project, needs its development consent order, which we submitted this year, and we are expecting the examination phase to start quite shortly, and we are hoping to have a planning decision by the end of next year. And we have applied for our nuclear site licence and, of course, all our environmental consents. And the really critical thing about Sizewell C is that it's a copy of Hinkley Point C. So unlike the whole history of UK nuclear power station builds, we're going to build the exact same design above ground in Suffolk as we're building in Somerset. And when we do that, we save a lot of money on design, and we save a lot of money on contractors learning to work on a nuclear site, and we save a lot of money in contractors qualifying to provide equipment into the UK nuclear regime. And as we recover from COVID, it's really important for everybody to focus on jobs. Sizewell C can offer fantastic numbers of really well-paid, high-quality jobs, and not just jobs, careers. You know, some of our team started as 16-year-old apprentices, and now they're doing jobs like running Hinkley Point C. So Stuart started as an apprentice, now he's the MD of Hinkley. Nigel, who is the delivery director, and lots of others in our team have started at 16 and then they've gone all the way through. And I think that the ability of the nuclear industry to act as a real engine for social mobility is something which we should talk about a lot more. So where is Hinkley? So Hinkley is going very well. It's meeting all of its key construction milestones. And because it's got 2 units, we can see the benefit of fleet build in action. So we can see on this slide the productivity gains between Unit 1 and Unit 2. And what we're hoping is to take those productivity gains for Unit 2, and they will be the start of the first Sizewell unit. So we'll help costs really come down for consumers. So the jobs that Sizewell will create are actually all over the UK. Obviously, there'll be a lot of jobs on site, but if you look at this map, you can see that the real hotspots where we also provide jobs in Wales, in the north of England, in the industrial heartlands, where, as we all know, as we move to a net zero economy, we need jobs in the industries which are going to go into decline as we stop burning carbon, creating carbon through combustion, and we need them replacing with jobs in the net zero industries. And Sizewell C will actually support a fantastic number of jobs on site and off site. And we're also planning to create 1,500 apprenticeships. So that's 500 more than for Hinkley. Because we're confident in what we're doing, we think we can support that greater number of apprentices and help really skill up young people who are having such a difficult time during this pandemic. So, to build Hinkley, which is the first nuclear power station in a generation in the UK, we've had to invest a lot in skills. You can see here on the slide some of the investments that we've made, and those skills are going to be really useful as we go forward with Sizewell. We will start off with a better skilled workforce, and we will carry on developing skills, and we have new plans, like, for example, we hope to open a new welding centre of excellence in the east of England. On the right-hand side of the slide, you can see some of the debate. Like any mega project, there are people who would prefer it weren't built, and that, of course, is entirely right and proper. We live in a democracy, and it's a good thing that people can express their views. Equally, there are an awful lot of people who would very much appreciate the introduction of jobs into the East of England region. People think of the East of England as wealthy, but actually Suffolk has some of the areas with some of the highest social deprivation in the UK, and there are places which really need levelling up just as much as any of the areas which are more generally talked about in the north. And you can also see that we've opened our UK EPR Engineering Centre in Bristol, really bringing the engineering for the EPR into the UK and providing a real base of skilled engineering going forward. So we formed a Sizewell C consortium representing around about 150 UK companies, and they represent careers for thousands and thousands of people. And what we want to do is to stop the idea that something like a mega project is really just all about the developer. It's actually almost all about the supply chain, and the developer is a thin layer on top. So we've got some fantastic support from our suppliers and also from the trade unions, and we're working together to develop Sizewell to be the best it can be, both for people who work in it and for UK consumers. So we need to deliver on the nuclear sector deal. The nuclear sector deal is to have on gender diversity, it's to have 40% women in the nuclear industry by 2030. And we also are very keen to promote diversity of all sorts, because a more diverse way of thinking is going to produce a better project. And when you've got a project like Sizewell C, which is going to actually touch a lot of people in the UK because it's providing electricity at a national scale, it's really important to reflect the society that we're aiming to serve. And it's also very important to us that we help deliver the nuclear sector deal target on cost reduction. You know, we're very acutely aware that as we come out of the pandemic and people's incomes are squeezed, the last thing people are going to want to see is really major rises in their electricity bills. And so the good news for nuclear is that it actually brings down the cost of electricity bills. People tend to be quite focused on the unit cost of generation, but of course your electricity bill is made up of the whole cost of having electricity brought to your home or your place of work 24 hours a day, 365 days of the year. And adding nuclear to the system, which is of course not weather dependent, will actually bring down the cost of your bills. So turning to construction, and I myself, I'm not a construction engineer. There are many people much better placed to talk about this than me. But in Hinkley Point C, there have been some industry leading innovations. So there's been a lot of modularisation, a lot of use of digital, so that we really bring the construction of nuclear forward so that it can be leading in the construction sector, as well as showing the way for UK new nuclear. I also wanted to talk a bit about what can you do with nuclear. In the UK, we've always used nuclear to produce grid scale electricity, but that only uses round about a third of the heat which the nuclear produces. Is actually a heat machine. And we are intending with Sizewell C to actually take out the spare heat and to use it to assist processes like electrolysing for hydrogen, where with the assistance of heat, we think it's going to be around 10% more efficient than with electricity alone. We're looking very hard at direct air capture, which again is made more efficient if you've got a big source of heat, so that there can be some room for those technologies which will find it very, very difficult to fully remove their CO2, and so that the Sizewell C itself can be carbon negative. And we're very interested in how the concept of Sizewell C producing a large amount of clean electricity and an awful lot of clean heat can align with the government's ideas about free ports. How can we help make UK manufacturing in free ports areas more competitive, even more competitive, by providing clean heat and power? And I should also say about hydrogen that we are looking at making the construction of Sizewell C a demonstration clean construction site. We're going to look at reducing our use of diesel and introducing vehicles and plant powered by hydrogen, and of course electric vehicles and plant, and seeing how far we can get in cleaning the construction site to the maximum extent possible, while of course maintaining our schedule and costs. So the last thing I'd like to mention is a project with the town which is nearest to Sizewell C, which is a town called Leiston. When we're talking about net zero, we often talk about an awful lot of technologies, and that's right. But we need also to talk about social acceptability. How far is the population willing to go in changing the way that we live today to live in a way which is more compatible with our journey to net zero? So we set up a project with the town council and with the county council in Leiston, which is a bit like Dragon's Den. We, with our partners, you can see there on the slide, including some of our leading engineering companies, are working out a route map to net zero. And then we're operating the project a bit like Dragon's Den. We come forward with ideas, and then the community act as the dragons and let us know which of those ideas they think are going to be popular to implement into Leiston. And what this should give us is actually a blueprint, and we'll make this open source for other similar communities. So post-industrial towns, it's in a rural area, it's about 5,000 people. It should give a blueprint for how can you get a town to net zero in a way which has the full buy-in of its community. Then the last thing I'd like to talk about is our further ambition for new nuclear. We would very much like to build a third twin UK EPR, and we'd like to build that at Moorside in Cumbria, and we would like it to be conceived of from the start as powering clean industry. So from the start, instead of thinking of it as just providing electricity, which is of course a more than useful thing to do, we'd like to think about it as being the centre of a clean energy park. That's something which the community around Cumbria is actually calling for, and if we can help fulfil their vision, then that will be a great thing for the UK and a great thing for the construction industry here in Britain.
Hello, I'm Jo Harrison. I'm the Director of Environment Planning and Innovation at United Utilities. And I want to talk to you today about how we manage our existing asset base to ensure that it can be even more effective, whilst managing obviously the critical aspects of cost. So I wanted to just talk to you today a little bit about the assets that we manage in the northwest of England and how we sort of trying to optimise our investment across that asset base. So United Utilities is the water company for the northwest. We serve 7 million customers every day, and as you can see from that slide, we've got a huge quantity of assets that we have to manage. So around sort of 568 wastewater treatment works, 56,000 kilometres of sewer, and so on. But in order to do that, we really need to be optimising our investment. Those assets are very, very long in their sort of age, and so we've got many assets that are over 100 years old. So it's really critical that we're optimising that investment and being able to deliver the best value for money for our customers. So I'm going to talk to you today about how we're trying to use a smarter approach to asset management and taking 3 different case studies to talk you through. One looking at tanks, another looking at pipes, and the last one looking at pumps. So what we're going to really talk through is our approach to understanding the requirements at each of those different asset bases and how we can really try and sort of drive improvements, recognising that we've got very much sort of a limited amount of funding available in order to be able to deliver the improvements that are needed across those asset bases, but also that we've got a very significant number of operational challenges in terms of our key performance indicators that are set by our regulators, and that we need to sort of use these smarter approaches to really be able to drive that optimised performance going forward. So the first example I just wanted to talk through was around our approach to managing our service reservoirs. So many of you might remember that back in 2015 there was a serious water quality incident in the northwest associated with one of our treatment works in Lancashire called Franklaw. And what the findings of that investigation and the source of the cryptosporidium that caused the water quality incident was found to be the leaking roofs of our service reservoirs, and in particular one service reservoir at a place called Barnacre in Lancashire. And so that led us to really wanting to be able to understand the condition of our asset base, to be able to understand how those service reservoirs were performing. But of course, with all water companies, we have restricted amounts of investment that we can apply to these different types of assets. So we had £50 million worth of funding available to investigate the impact of flooding at our treatment works, at our service reservoirs. And so we really wanted to be able to sort of understand how we could optimise that investment and deliver improvements across the asset base. And this graph just shows you that actually some of those assets are over 100 years old, but it's not always the oldest asset which cause the problems in your asset base, because often it's the other surrounding impacts of things like ground conditions, construction materials that are actually causing the impacts to the asset age. So we wanted to be able to properly target our investment in order to be able to really determine where we have the highest level of risk. And so that was how we sort of set about delivering that programme. So understanding that underlying asset health of your assets is far more important than just understanding the age, and being able to model and quantify those different types of investment requirements is critically important. So as part of that work, and our research and the investigations that we undertook led to about 20 of those service reservoirs being abandoned, and the work was really focused on the rest of the asset base, really particularly targeting those areas where we knew that there was greatest risk. So we can now confirm that the majority of those assets are now absolutely watertight and fit for to hold drinking water for the populations of the North West. Another approach is looking at our networks. So we have a huge number of key performance indicators and metrics that our customers really hold us to associated with our water network. And pressure management in our water network is critical to being able to actually be able to deliver against those. So our regulators manage us against key performance indicators such as pressure management and leakage and the number of bursts. And obviously all of those lead to customer complaints. So being able to maximise the opportunity associated with investment around the water network is critical. And what we've identified, along with all of the water companies, is that how we manage pressure is critical to the performance of those assets. And water companies have been managing pressure in water mains for many, many years, but sometimes that's been quite crude. So the approach that we've taken is very much more around how do we sort of optimise that investment moving forward. So we've really tried to focus on looking at where the variance in pressure is across our asset base, and that's variance in either geography or in time. So in many locations, the pressure might vary across the day, and that pressure transience causes problems with the validity of the asset base and how it reacts to those different types of pressures. But also, if you have areas which have a very variable topography, then you find that you have different pressures associated with that too. So what we're trying to do is to really be able to understand the pressure of our systems and be able to modify it and be able to control it in a way that means that we can actually limit the impact on the assets going forward. So we've set about delivering a whole new programme of pressure management to really be able to optimise the pressure across our system. So we've divided our distribution zones up into much smaller areas, which allows us to take a much more sophisticated approach. And so you can see from those graphs that actually the overall level of pressure in our systems has been reduced over the period of being able to deliver this project, which has meant that we've got very significant improvements in performance and very much fewer bursts associated with that, those assets. But it's not just around how we sort of manage the pressure in those assets. It's when you install that new apparatus, install those pressure management valves, we've got to make sure that actually our people can really sort of understand how to maintain those assets and be able to access them safely. So historically, when we've installed pieces of kit like this, we've often found that we've constructed access chambers and so on, which make it difficult to undertake repairs and to ensure that we've got the right supplies for our customers. So as part of this whole approach, we've taken a different approach to constructing our chambers so that they're much more accessible and people can operate and work more safely, but also it means that we can just get in and repair things much more easily and safely going forward. And that's the result of it. So you can see that the overall benefits of pressure management mean a huge reduction in the risk associated with bursts going forward. So that's beneficial for us as a company. It reduces the amount of time that we need to spend maintaining our assets, and it drives improvements for customers. But it's not just our civil assets that are important here. We also need to sort of focus on our mechanical assets. And so we've also been looking at how we can optimise our maintenance of our pumps across our asset base, both water and wastewater pumps. And like many companies, we've gone through different approaches to pump maintenance over the years, but we had got to a situation where if an asset failed, we were either replacing that asset with a new asset or we were hiring in a pump to replace that asset. And that sort of felt that we like a situation where we weren't really optimising the life of those assets and being able to really sort of extend the life and make sure that we were spending customers' money in the most efficient way. So we set about building a new refurbishment centre at a place called Dock Road South, which is in Merseyside, which basically sort of sets about how trying to sort of maintain those assets and build an asset base for the future so that we've always got available assets that we can then put back into supply. So the workshop at Dock Road South enables us to really sort of be able to take that sort of holistic look at how we sort of extend the life of our assets. So if a pump fails, then it gets taken to the workshop. It's then reviewed and an assessment of that sort of the viability of that asset is undertaken. And then we're obviously sort of looking at the whole variety of different asset management interventions that we can deliver there. Can we reuse that asset? Can we use components of that asset, or can we completely refurbish it? So that's the sort of the cycle of work that we undertake as we sort of go through that life cycle. And what that enables us to do then is to take a view about whether we need to dispose of that asset or that we can indeed keep it as part of our inventory and that we can use it then to optimise the way that we manage our replacement assets going forward. And that whole sort of optimisation cycle really enables us to drive efficiencies into our supply chain. It enables us to really sort of think about how we optimise that approach to maintenance in the long term. So that's just a shot there of the workshop at Dock Road, and you can see the refurbished pumps there waiting to be installed at another location. So I think really the conclusion of our presentation today is that we have a finite amount of investment that we can deliver to really sort of drive improvements in our asset base across the Northwest. We have to be able to optimise where that investment is and how we can really sort of think about how it delivers the best benefits for our customers. So, we know that we have got an ageing asset base. We know that asset health is deteriorating, but how do we just think differently about trying to sort of drive improvements to maintain the condition of those assets and ensure that we can extend the asset life until it's a viable time, an appropriate planned time to be able to drive those improvements going forward. Thank you.
Thanks for two really interesting presentations. I thought I'd kick things off by asking you, Julia, you're talking about quite long-term timescales with quite a degree of uncertainty. I was wondering kind of how you make the case or make the pitch to some of the smaller companies in the supply chain that might be involved.
So, provided that we get our development consent order at the end of 2021 and that government policy all aligns, then we think that actually this is among the more certain projects because we're building a known design. So we know what we need to buy. We just need the policy framework aligning so that we can get going. Okay.
And in terms of that, does that still open it up to other companies being involved in? I know obviously you're replicating things, but are there still opportunities out there for people?
Absolutely, there are lots of opportunities. When we talk about replicating, we mean we're going to replicate the design and we're going to replicate some of the key experience so that we have the same systems and so that we have enough of the transfer of knowledge. But there are really huge opportunities for existing suppliers to Hinckley and new suppliers in the UK.
Okay, I'm just coming to you, Joe. On that kind of long-term approach point, it was something that came up a couple of times in your presentation. I was wondering whether, with some of the organisations that you've been working with for a long time, whether that required a bit of a change in culture or a change in the business model that they're operating.
So I think, for us, we've got to really sort of try and drive efficiency in our asset solutions. So one of the things that is really important is to look at that sort of blend of short-term interventions that can extend an asset life and long-term interventions that can replace the asset's condition. And so where I think we're sort of finding that we need to sort of work with the supply chain a little bit more is really around the former. So it's, we've got years of history of replacing assets and building new assets. We've got far less experience of how we optimize what we already have, how we maybe change its use, how we sort of deliver improved performance from existing assets. So that's really where we need to sort of work differently with the supply chain.
And have you found that you're expanding the number of suppliers that you're working with, and you're having to think more broadly about it to respond to that challenge?
Yes, I think in particular, one of the things that we're trying to do in the water industry is look more specifically at how we can deliver what we call nature-based solutions. So how using natural systems like reed beds as an example to treat wastewater, how we can use those much more prolifically within the sort of our asset base. And so I think that's quite important to sort of think about how we sort of extend the capability of our suppliers to really sort of look at alternative solutions.
Okay. Julia, you mentioned the levelling up agenda. It's something that comes up time and again. How do you see a project like Sizewell fitting into that, and what function do you play?
So our first function is that we are able to offer an awful lot of training, so help people get onto the skills ladder. And we're also taking the approach of reskilling people so that they're able to move through the life of the project, adding to their skills. And some of these skills are things which are in really short supply in the UK, in particular welding and really high-end welding. And then in terms of the levelling up agenda, sort of beyond our skills contribution, we have a particular focus on helping people who find it harder to access work find their way into the project through local charities who work with kids who are not in employment or training. We are going to sign up to the government's Kickstart scheme so that we can help give employability experience to people. And then a huge number of the jobs are actually in the industrial heartlands, where some of the greatest levelling up focus is with UK manufacturers. So we think that all in all, Sizewell can support something like 75,000 jobs in the UK, some of them directly at full time and some of them by giving UK manufacturing and other supply work. So we think we can make a really huge contribution to levelling up across lots of areas of the UK.
And it's beyond the areas that are in the vicinity of the actual project itself, isn't it? It's other areas as well that you're looking to build.
Yeah, that's right. We have a very big supply chain to Hinckley from Wales. And for Sizewell, we're looking to sign a memorandum of understanding with the Welsh Government around our use of the Welsh supply chain and employees from Wales. And we're looking to do this. We've done the same thing for the north of England. We've signed a memorandum of understanding about northern contract values in the supply chain. And of course, we'll sign an MOU with the east of England, the home region of the project. So it really is a project with national reach.
And it just kind of brings the similar topic over to you, Joe. Obviously, you're kind of focused on particular locations. I was wondering in kind of how you see improving your own asset base in terms of that levelling up agenda or kind of the skills topic.
So obviously we have sort of investment that we need to deliver across the northwest. But we have particular areas of focus where we see that sort of critical overlap of different aspects of what we do as a water company. So where we need to sort of drive improvements in water management, in flooding, in water resources. And so we've identified what we call strategic catchments. And so North Manchester is one of those, Blackpool and the Fylde Coast is another, and the area around Carlisle. And critically, they are also areas that have been particularly hit by COVID. They are particular focus for investment for things like the green recovery. So there's sort of overlap of needs between sort of driving improvements in the environment plus the benefits for communities that live and work in those areas is really sort of closely aligned. So it is something that we're particularly focusing on. Another aspect which is sort of moves away from our sort of construction aspects, but is just about the management of our land that we have in the Northwest. So we're really focused on how we provide better access to communities, particularly in deprived areas, to the land that we have to drive improvements in health and well-being.
Kind of preempted my next question there, which is what the impact of COVID has been in terms of your plans. Have you had to think about greater levels of flexibility? What's it changed?
So I think we've been very lucky as an organisation. We've managed to continue to deliver almost everything as we've needed to as a water company. So, obviously, like everybody else, we've all moved to work from home, and apart from our sort of key site staff, we have seen some issues in the supply chain, particularly initially back at the start of spring, but they're largely now resolved. And so all of our capital work is on track and delivering as we would expect it to be. So our sort of focus now really is how do we sort of look at some of these opportunities that come with things like the green recovery to be able to drive additional investment and opportunities for people across the region.
I suppose, Julia, for you, obviously, as a forward-looking project, what was the impact on yourself, and did it change the way that the plans that you were making in any way?
Well, I think that because we are going to copy the design of Hinkley, we're obviously very closely linked to the Hinkley project, and we've been observing the way that Hinkley's managed through the pandemic to keep the site open and to keep on track, and that's been really impressive to see. And I think that the nuclear industry, because it does have an awful lot of process associated with it, has actually been able to adapt that process to careful management of COVID. In terms of Sizewell, I think the pandemic has probably heightened the need for more local employment. I think it's caused us to look harder at bringing even more of the value of the projects back into the UK. So disrupted supply chains has made us look at where we can replace overseas suppliers with UK suppliers. So we were already aiming for 70% UK content for Sizewell, but following the pandemic, we think we will probably actually be able to push that up higher.
And Joe, you mentioned some of the technological aspects. I mean, one of the other big things that's really come to the fore recently has been the kind of climate change agenda, the announcements that have come recently. With a lot of the stuff you're talking about, it's kind of in line with the theme of retrofitting. Do you think that there's a lot of energy and kind of emphasis on the type of thing that you're trying to do?
So I think as part of my responsibility, I look after sort of climate change adaptation and mitigation for United Utilities. So I think that it's a sort of area that's really close to my heart. And I think there are two aspects really, aren't there? That first of all, how do we drive to achieve our carbon targets of as a net zero by 2030? And that means changes to the way we work, our fleet, the way we buy electricity, but also the way that we design our projects and how we deliver those. So it's very much part of that design capability. We're also obviously looking at how resilient those assets are for the long term. So that's part of the reason why we really want to sort of ensure that we're maximising the opportunity that we've got from our existing asset base and making that more resilient to the long term. And what we can't do is keep building our way out of climate change. We can't just keep creating bigger assets. We've got to think of different ways of managing water and the way that we use those assets going forward.
Brilliant. Joe, Julia, thank you very much.